Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm Sajid Lipum. I'm here once again with my brother Omar Shatila. And today, inshallah, we will be responding to some of the feedback that we received from our latest video where we discussed a podcast that came out with Dr. Yasir Qadhi. It was called Yasir Qadhi Unrepentantly Reveals All. So, first of all, let me just say that, alhamdulillah, the vast majority of the feedback has been very positive. Many people have showed a lot of support and appreciation, but today we want to talk about some of the people who they have negative feedback and they've been critical of the video, and that's what we basically want to talk about today. So most of the negative feedback, it all revolved around the idea that Dr. Yasir Qadhi is essentially an elite intellectual. Nobody really brought forth anything from the Quran and Sunnah. They didn't really address any of the specific points we made. It all just seems to be that people trust him with their deen. They believe that he is a qualified person that they should follow. And they look at people like us, perhaps, who are you? And I understand that people, they get upset. This has been a problem that we faced in the West for a long time. Who can we get our deen from? And then once you find somebody you like, if they get refuted, it gets frustrating, and I understand that is an issue. But today we want to talk about, is that the reality? Is Islam so complicated that only somebody like Yasir Qadhi, who, throughout the podcast, he was constantly talking about his credentials. He was constantly talking about how he mastered this creed. He got a degree from here. He got a degree from there. He sat at this sheikh's feet. He knows him better than you. He loves him more than you. And so him going this route, he has a lot of people convinced of that. So today we sort of just want to talk about some of the aspects of Islam that pertain to the direction he's moving in. And hopefully, if you are sincere and you really do want to learn about your deen, you will see that it's not so complicated. You don't have to blind follow somebody just because they have their PhD from Yale. But a lot of these things are very basic and easy to understand. So inshallah, that's what we're going to discuss. Omar, is there anything you'd like to add before we move forward?
Well, there's a few points. Number one is the issue isn't with Yale in of itself. I think people got fixated on that. The issue is with that Yale impacted how he viewed his deen, how he understood his deen. And regardless of how much he learned about Islam from Yale or learned nothing at all about Islam from Yale, we're not talking about the information. Even if he learned nothing at all, not at all from Yale in terms of information about Islam, it still impacted the way he understood and viewed what he already knew from the teaching of Islam. It impacted how he viewed that. And I think that's what people need to understand. That's what people need to realize. And if we look at the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he said, if Allah wants good for someone, then he gives him the proper understanding of the deen. It doesn't say he gives him knowledge, information. So knowledge is not just having a lot of information about the deen. How many people have a lot of information? They can recite so much verses of the Quran, they can relate so many hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, so many even mutun and texts of books of the scholars, but they don't have much understanding of those books. So that's point number one. Point number two that is important to make is for those who are so upset. Now clearly he changed, right? That's based on his own admission, first and foremost. He said himself he's changed so many of his views over the last 20 years.
Yeah, and if I can interject for a second, because many people, they're acting as if we are making this crazy allegation that he changed after going to Yale. This is something he admits himself over and over again. He's been on a campaign for years now talking about how he's changed. This is something he admits, so this isn't some sort of false claim that we're making,
So number one, he admits it. Number two, it's very clear and evident based on his views. When so many of his views has changed over the years, then you could tell that something's going on there. So those two. But even if we don't look and analyze his views or anything, by his own admission, he said he's changed a lot of his views, his experience in Yale. He's been exposed to a different type of knowledge. That's what he's saying. It's not like we're claiming something that he's denying. So for all the people that are trying to defend him by denying that, they're indirectly refuting him they're refuting him, what he's saying about himself, that he changed, in an attempt to defend him. The other point I'd like to make is that the people who are happy and like his views today, for the most part, they're in two groups of people. Number one are people who didn't used to like him before, didn't used to like what he was calling to when he first started off with his da'wah, didn't follow him or listen to him, and now they're happy when he's, with what he's calling to now, with the views that he's holding and calling people to today. So those people, obviously, they're not following him today because of what he's saying is the truth, but rather because it matches what they like, what they wanted. It's not because they thought he was a credible scholar that he was calling to what's right, because they would have followed him to begin with. Now, the other group, the people who did used to follow him and listen to him and like him and learn from him, throughout the years. Now, to those people, I ask, if you thought that he was calling to the truth before, if you thought that he was calling to the truth before, and you thought that he was correct before, and now after he has changed, what changed? That's the question. Did the truth change because he changed his views? Or are you going to admit then all the views that you've held, because he held them in the past, were false and incorrect? And so people are stuck in that place. You have to admit something. If what he's used to, the views that he used to hold were the truth back then, and the views that he holds today are true today, and they conflict, and a lot of them conflict. They heavily conflict in foundational, basic principles of Islam, of how to view Islam. So if what he was calling to was the truth back then, and what he's calling to is the truth today, then I don't know what definition of truth they believe in.
And this is the danger of following personalities, because you could fall in love with somebody while they're giving proper da'wah, and rather than loving them based on the truth, whether or not they're speaking the haqq, once they start changing, your love for them causes you to change with them. And this is why one of the most important things is to take knowledge from those who they've already passed away upon haqq, because people change. And may Allah keep all of us firm upon the truth.
And that's a very important point, that this is actually a statement from the Salaf. And many of the scholars emphasize that. Take your knowledge with regards to the deen. First of all, there's a statement from one of the Salaf that say, look to whom you take knowledge from, because this is deen. This is knowledge in terms of the deen. Because who you learn from is going to impact your deen. Shape your deen, shape how you view Islam, how you practice Islam, how you believe in Allah altogether. But they've also said that take your knowledge or follow those who have passed, because the one who's alive, they're not safe from the fitna. None of us are safe from being inflicted by fitna. May Allah protect us all. May Allah guide us all to the truth and to that which benefits Him. May Allah protect us from being exposed to fitan and falling into fitan and having doubts that we can't make sense of, that shake our faith to its core. But that's where it's important. If someone's alive, and even if they're calling to the truth, a fitna might come to them and they're inflicted by that and they change, they're not upon the truth anymore. And if someone's following them thinking they're upon the truth, they're going to change and shift with them away from the truth as well. But if someone has passed away, we already know how they lived their life, what they were upon, even up until their death. Then we can follow them, knowing that things aren't going to change.
Yeah, and that's just a brief introduction. Now we want to get a little bit more educational with the video. And the fact of the matter is, when it comes to long videos, so for example, Yasir Qadhi's podcast, it was about an hour and 20 minutes long. I know our video, in response to that, it was 1 hour long, and we can check the analytics and see that the average view duration was about 13 minutes out of 60 minutes, right? So Allahu Alam, who even watched our full video, who even watched the full podcast. And now we're going to try to keep things short to keep everyone's attention span, but we want to get a bit educational because we want to show you how this isn't a matter of Newtonian and Einsteinian physics, that it's just there's a certain elite class who can actually fathom some of these things. We want to talk about things such as Aqeedah, because that was what disturbed me the most about some of what Yasir Qadhi was saying in the podcast.
But I'd like to mention one thing, because that also shows if someone's sincere, and they want to truly, if they see something that they don't agree with and they want to reply, they would watch, not just watch very carefully and listen to what the other person is saying in order to understand the other person, what they're saying, what is it, truly their position before they respond. And to see that the average person watched the video for 13 minutes and the comments are flying left and right, it's sad, because someone shouldn't be able to comment or respond agreeing or disagreeing with anyone unless they've heard what they've said and understood what they've said. And the point that I'd like to make, and I know you might not want me to mention that, but Brother Sajid had watched this video podcast of Yasir Qadhi several times before, just making sure that he understood what the guy was saying, making sure that he's not taking anything out of context. The people that are jumping, saying he took things out of context and whatnot, they probably didn't even watch the podcast. Or they might have just watched it very quick, and clicked through or whatever. To give him, and this is something I didn't do, which he did, to give him credit for. But I think this shows, first of all, that you're truly trying to listen to him for understanding. You aren't just trying to pick and nitpick, as some people thought, at his faults, at the things that he said there were wrong. You watched and rewatched to make sure that this is what he was saying, that you're not taking anything out of context, you're not blowing anything out of proportion. And you know what? I think you deserve credit for that, and that's worth mentioning. And I doubt the people that are criticizing some of the things we're bringing up without any proof or without any specifics, that they've even watched whether our own podcast, our own discussion that we had, or even Yasir Qadhi's podcast that he, the hour and a half long video that he put out. Allah knows best.
Yeah, I mean, Allahu Alam. I just think it's important that, I guess, perhaps people, there's benefit in you mentioning that, just so that people know, like, we're not just trying to refute Yasir Qadhi just to refute him. Like, I did watch it several times. I took notes. I re-listened to it. Even after we put out our video and before, I prayed istikhara and I listened to his podcast again just to make sure, because this is a big deal. So Allah knows best. And this is also why I went through the comments and I'm engaging people. There are other graduates even who are saying they enjoyed Yasir Qadhi's podcast, and I'm asking them why. That's shocking to me. Like, what did you like about it? And to this day, nobody has told me anything specific they liked about it. Nobody has said anything specific they like about it or something specific about what we said. It all comes down to basically, he's just this knowledgeable sheikh, and you should humble yourself. And I'm still open to criticism. May Allah guide us all to the truth. That's what this is all about. This isn't about following personalities and egos. It's about the truth. So may Allah guide all of us.
I want to add one thing about the people who said, we've been, because some people commented and were upset that we're even mentioning any of that. And I don't know why people get upset if someone points out or disagrees with someone, because this is a basic principle in our deen, where you see even companions responding to each other. Who is Yasir Qadhi? He's not above being responded to, or someone saying that he was wrong in this, or pointing out a mistake that he has done. If the companions did that themselves, and you know what, subhanAllah, I've even come across an advertisement for a seminar by a student of knowledge or someone about the Abu Bakr and Umar, may Allah be pleased with them both. And even in the flyer advertising them, there's pointing out to their faults, saying that they were people like me and you. They despite their faults and this and that. And I mean, obviously they wanted to show that they became great, but people don't see that. Okay, they're human and they had shortcomings. But even the seminar, the person advertising for the seminar is pointing to the faults of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu and Umar radiallahu anhu, and people aren't as upset about any of that. So there's nothing wrong with pointing out to the faults or mistakes of Yasir Qadhi. He's not above that, and if anything, if people who are sincere would want that. For me, if someone responds, if I say something and someone responds, it's an opportunity, if I'm correct, for me to have more conviction of that, and to clarify to them that what they believe is incorrect. And if I'm wrong, then it's an opportunity for me to see the truth and accept that and go back to that. And it's part of our deen, part of enjoining the good, forbidding the evil. There's no problem with that. And people who are overly sensitive to that, I think it's because of that other extreme of people refuting others left and right and calling people deviant for minor stuff. And people are overly, they're overly sensitized because of that, and they're going to the other extreme with things. One extreme is you refute everyone, everything for everything, and the other extreme is you don't say anything about anyone else. You don't say, and they're both extremes. And some of the people in the comments who said, we've been saying this for years, since Yasir Qadhi graduated from Medina, he's been deviant, blah, blah, blah. To them, I'd say, and someone even mentioned a story from the time of the companions, may Allah be pleased with them, of how some of them went to the masjid and they saw a group of people, not from the companions, who were doing an innovated form of dhikr, which was a bid'ah, which that one of those companions denounced that, because obviously they're coming up with something new. They're indirectly claiming that they are upon better guidance than the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself and his companions, because they never used to remember Allah this way. A very interesting story, by the way. But then later on, the narrator of this hadith says that we saw these people who were doing that bid'ah in the masjid fighting against us with the Khawarij. So these people, this shows, by the way, the danger of small deviations, small innovations that in the long term later on might lead someone astray further than that into major deviations, major innovations, which would happen in that case. In the beginning, they were just doing an innovation when it comes to dhikr, remembering Allah, and then they end up fighting the companions with the Khawarij. The thing to point out there is that the person who's saying Yasir Qadhi had these mistakes in the past and we knew he was going to end up here, what I want to say to these people, please, remember that only Allah knows the future. And yes, maybe Yasir Qadhi had mistakes in the past. I think no one is, that's not the point we were trying to make. That yes, he had mistakes in the past, but everyone has mistakes. No one is perfect. Every scholar has made mistakes in the past. Every scholar will continue to make mistakes in the future. We all are human. None of us are perfect. We all have mistakes and shortcomings. But the issue is here where he's changed his whole methodology and approach over the last several years. And this is gradual. No, I'm pretty sure it's going to be difficult to pinpoint at one point that change, because it's gradual, and I'm sure he can tell you himself that his change in views was gradual. It didn't happen overnight. He didn't go to sleep one way and wake up another way. But the issue is with not that he has a mistake here and there, but with the whole foundation of which he is viewing and understanding the teachings of Islam with. The whole premise on which he's building Islam on and the teachings of Islam and how he views them is where the issue is.
Yeah, I think you make so many good points specifically about respectfully disagreeing. This idea of like refuting each other, it doesn't have to be to the level that it has become over the years based on that extreme group, right? It's like, oh, they're just so disrespectful about it. May Allah break his back, and he, just so mean and just over the top with it. And I think that has led so many other people who disagree with him, people who are involved in da'wah, who have credentials similar to, if not more than him, they're afraid to speak out because everyone gets categorized into that harsh group, So, and another thing to point out is that, again, let's be fair here. Yasir Qadhi in his podcast, he was also refuting certain ideologies, right? He was also saying that like certain people who are stuck in Newtonian physics, there's no hope for them. I mean, he was saying a lot of things as well, right?
Well, the funny thing is, he also said that they're all wrong in terms of understanding Aqeedah, that it's, right and wrong and black and white in that sense. So, I mean, if you want to talk about, people thinking that, calling others out and saying they're wrong, I mean, he contradicted himself to everyone, to all the Muslims and all those different sects, whether they're upon the truth or they're part of a deviant sect. He practically said they're all wrong, and he's the only one who's right in his understanding, and that point which he disagreed with everyone on.
Right. So let's all try not to be so emotional. Let's try to ask Allah for guidance and ikhlas, and just look at the truth. Look at the facts that are being mentioned. So
the sad part is that people view things with the mindset of either you're with me or against me. Either you're my best friend, my best buddy, you don't say anything bad about me, you support me in everything that I say, or you're my enemy, you're against me if you say I did a mistake, or my sheikh is wrong, or anything bad about the shuyukh I follow. Then that's it, you're a deviant, I don't like you, I hate your guts, you're my enemy. And that actually reminds me of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he said, give victory to your brother whether he's oppressed or an oppressor. And stop and obviously giving victory to people when they're oppressed is clear. If someone's being oppressed, you give victory by supporting them, by helping relieve and remove the oppression from them. But if someone is the oppressor themselves, how do you give victory to them? The companions asked the Prophet ﷺ, how do you give victory to someone who is the oppressor himself? So he said, stop him from his oppression, that is giving him victory. So people need to remember that, have that type of mindset, and they should view it as that if we're wrong about what we're saying, then it's very easy to clarify and respond with proof, not with emotions, and not with accusations, with proof, that to show that we're wrong. And if we're right, then they should be happy about it, because that's giving victory to him and to them, and we're advising them and stopping them from falling into falsehood, and that is, if they're sincere, that should be their ultimate goal. It's not about the people. I wish people didn't dwell on who he is as much as they dwell up on what he says, and that's the crux of, that's the main issue here. It has nothing to do with him. I couldn't care less at the end of the day, honestly, because it's not about him. It's not about him, and it's about these fundamental beliefs and teachings of the deen.
And you make a great point about this whole idea of you're either for me or against me, because I remember when I first arrived in Medina, I was sort of being pulled in two different directions by two different groups at these two different extremes. And when that was happening, it seems as if those are the only two extremes that exist. But over the years, as I tried to just be cool with everybody and find the truth for myself and focus on myself and my family, I started meeting all of these people who are balanced, who are in the middle. You'll be surprised that, maybe these extremes are the ones who make the loudest noise, and they might, seemingly cause so much fitna, but there are so many people who are balanced, who are in the middle, and it's a shame that many of them don't speak up, because I guess they're afraid. Allahu Alam, I honestly don't understand, but perhaps they're afraid of being pigeonholed as being to a certain extreme, or whatever the case may be. But that balance, and people who are balanced, it does exist. And that was one of the main issues I had with Yasir Qadhi's podcast, was that he kept, every time he explained one ideology versus another, he always went to the extreme. It was never a balance. It was never somebody overseas, they might not know certain situations and they might understand other situations. It was just like they don't understand, and if you want to stick to the Quran and Sunnah, it's like that means that you have no balance. You just go to the masjid and you argue with everybody. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, no, there is a balance.
The funny thing, some people in the comments mentioned that, he's talking about a practical approach and I don't know what, and involved with the people, and as if we don't have that experience. We are involved in our communities. We've been exposed to different things. Practically, alhamdulillah, I've been involved in Islamic education for many years, working with communities that are very diverse, come from different backgrounds. That's one point that's completely separate. That doesn't mean we change the deen. I don't change the deen for anyone. Just because I don't kick someone out of the masjid or out of our Islamic school because the certain beliefs that they might have that I might view as incorrect, or I think they're opposing the Quran and the authentic Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, or that they're wrong beliefs, or they have wrong Aqeedah, or whatever it may be, doesn't mean that I'm going to change the deen for them just so that they feel happy and we're all united and kumbaya and all that stuff, and like everyone gets together and hold hands and like that type of mindset, which I mean, you've seen a lot of people fall into that, even when it comes to interfaith. Alhamdulillah, I've been involved with, and I'm sure you have as well, coming from a background of not being a Muslim and then becoming a Muslim, of interacting and discussing and the teachings of Islam, teachings of other faiths with other people who aren't Muslims, and having beneficial, constructive discussions without necessarily just patting each other in the back and saying yeah, you know what, you can believe whatever you want, it's all true, kind of like that mushy, lumping everything together and not watering down the deen and saying no, I don't believe that about this person or that person, or like, no, you're all about. I mean, the deen itself, every person believes that their beliefs, what they hold to be true, is correct, and what other people hold to be true that conflicts with that is false. And without that, there's no point in believing in anything altogether. Deen itself has no weight, has no purpose anymore. If we believe that everyone was correct and everyone's fine and it doesn't matter who follows what, there's no point in following anything then. And even Christians believe that they're correct, and that what we believe about Isa alayhi salam that conflicts with what they believe about him is false. And to us, what we believe about him is the truth, and what they believe that conflicts with what we believe about him is false. And Jews believe what they believe about Isa alayhi salam to be true, and what the Christians and the Muslims believe about Isa alayhi salam that conflicts with their belief is false. And that's normal. People need to be comfortable with that. Not agreeing with someone doesn't necessarily mean, you go to an extreme. Either you go to an extreme of disagreeing and killing each other and fighting and calling for violence against people and shoving the what you view as the truth down their throat and forcing them to accept what you believe. And the other extreme is saying, no, you know what? It's all fine and dandy. It's all true. It's all fine. There's nothing wrong with you believing in anything. I mean, they're not holding any weight to what we believe is true, what we believe is to be actually correct.
Right. And balance is, like I say over and over and over again, that was the number one benefit from me going abroad and studying the deen in Medina. It's understanding that the truth, the haqq, Islam, it is in between two extremes. So that's something to always take note of. And so the point you made about not changing the deen, I think, is a good segue into what we initially wanted to talk about. I know this introduction was a lot longer, and hopefully people have stuck with us, but we wanted to talk about Aqeedah. So basically, let's define Aqeedah, and we also wanted to compare it to fiqh, because there are a lot of people who conflate the two, and that's very problematic. So Aqeedah is an Arabic word, but in English it's often translated to theology. This is the term that's often used, is theology. So Aqeedah refers to those matters that are believed in with certainty and conviction in one's heart and soul. They are not tainted with any doubt or uncertainty. Okay, so this is what Aqeedah is. So as you said, for example, the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims, we all have an Aqeedah in relation to Isa alayhi salam, right? The Jews, they reject him completely. The Christians worship him. The Muslims, we have a balance. We don't reject him. We don't worship him. We regard him as a prophet of Allah, right? And so we all have a different Aqeedah. And we can't all be correct in regards to that, just as you were mentioning. So this idea that we can look at Islam and say, you know what, when it comes to Aqeedah, the different strands, even though they have certain things that are irreconcilable, they are differences that you can't, they don't go together. You can't sit there and say that you even have an Aqeedah if you're going to say that, all the Aqeedahs they're correct and they're fine and you can follow whatever you want. Because even in the definition, how can you have a belief without any doubt or uncertainty if you believe that there is another Aqeedah that is also correct at the same time? It just simply doesn't make sense. And you can even see this in the Shahada. When you become a Muslim, what do you say? You say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. You say that there is nothing worthy of worship except Allah. You have negation and affirmation. You don't say, you know what, there might be other gods besides Allah, but I worship Allah, right? And this is what the mushrikeen of Mecca, that was the whole issue, was that they might have believed in Allah, but they wanted to worship other than Allah. So when it comes to Aqeedah, it's really not so wishy-washy that I feel like Yasir Qadhi was trying to call people to in his podcast.
That's a very important point. See, the thing is, Aqeedah is issues that pertain to our basic beliefs in the deen. Things that we as Muslims hold to be true. And to confuse that with differences of opinion when it comes to fiqh or the four madhahib, or to even mention them together, it's a huge confusion for the people, because fiqh and aqeedah are not the same. The four imams and the scholars of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they all had the same aqeedah, the aqeedah of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, basic principles that they all agreed upon. And the groups, the deviant sects that he mentioned, are not upon that. They have so many different aspects of their aqeedah that is incorrect, that is wrong, that conflicts with the beliefs of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Just as an example, he gave, the Ash'aris. The Ash'aris, some people might not even know what the Ash'aris believe in or stand for, but he lumped them all together with Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. It's okay, you can study the Ash'ari creed, the Maturidi creed, it's like as if it's like whatever, it's all the same. Their beliefs, their belief when it comes to al-qadar is incorrect. The Ash'a'ira, their beliefs when it comes to believing in proper qadar of Allah, which is one of the pillars of Iman. We're not talking about, minor things, branches. This is one of the 6 pillars of Iman, is believing in the qadar of Allah. When it comes to their belief in the qadar of Allah, they have a wrong belief in the qadar of Allah. They believe that people are forced to do things, that they, basically they're not in charge of the things that they do. When it comes to Iman, believing that Iman increases and decreases, for example, they're upon the belief of the Murji'ah. They believe that, once you are a believer, your Iman is perfect and nothing can harm, it doesn't go up and down. That's it. It's all or none in terms of Iman. If you're a believer, if you're a Muslim, your Iman is perfect, just like the Iman of Jibreel, just like the Iman of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Doing good deeds doesn't increase your Iman. Doing bad deeds and sins doesn't decrease your Iman. Very, deviated and false beliefs when it comes to the basic teachings of Aqeedah. They don't affirm and believe in the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They only affirm 7 of them that happens to, because based on their own intellect, their own mind, what they can comprehend with their limited understanding, those 7 attributes is what they think that, okay, you can affirm these attributes to Allah. Other attributes, they deny. They deny that Allah rose over his throne. Allah says in the Quran in many places, it's clear. They deny that. They say, oh, Allah's, he's not, they deny that Allah is above the heavens and the earth, that he's above his creation. They say, no, he's not in, the world. He's not out of the world. Very philosophical, very, far away from the Quran and the Sunnah, the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and what his companions understood about the deen. They have so many different views and basic beliefs that are incorrect. So it's not very simple, as easy as just to brush it off and say it's not a big deal. They're from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. It's fine if someone studies that. He's misguiding people by directing them to pick whatever randomly and study. It doesn't hurt them whatever branch or whatever strand of Aqeedah they study. You're literally directing people to misguidance in core, foundational, basic principles of their belief in Islam. And people are just going to be confused and they're going to believe false things. And that might cause them to go away from the deen rather than closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and closer to the deen, because they're going to be confused when they're exposed to different doubts with the false beliefs that they can't even defend. So they might think, well, this is Islam, I can't defend this doesn't make sense, they'll reject it. Just like in Christianity, a lot of Christians that I've talked to, especially the ones who have either turned to atheism or accepted Islam, the reason why they left Christianity is because say that Jesus is God and you should worship him doesn't make sense. So they couldn't defend that, so they just gave up all that, and they assumed that that's what Christianity teaches, Christianity is wrong. The problem is when Muslims have false beliefs in Islam that they believe, they hold to be true, that they hold to be part of Islam, part of the deen, and then at the slightest doubt that someone casts on those beliefs, they're false beliefs. Someone points that out, they're going to lose faith in Islam, not in those beliefs. Well, okay, these teachings were wrong, Islam is still true. I just had the wrong beliefs about Allah or about those basic beliefs in Aqeedah. Then they're going to turn away from the deen altogether. A lot of people in the comments mentioned that, like great scholars of the past were Ash'aris and I don't know what. That's a very common misconception. And the reality of it is, I wish for those people to go back and do their own research. Go back and look. People famously mention that, well, Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah, Nawawi, rahimahullah, great scholars of hadith, they were Ash'a'ira. That's not true. That's not true at all. They weren't Ash'a'ira. First of all, they're great scholars of hadith. And the Ummah has benefited a lot from their works in the science of hadith. No one ever held them to be scholars of Aqeedah. They never claimed themselves to be scholars of Aqeedah. They are scholars of hadith. MashaAllah, great scholars. The Ummah has benefited a lot from them, and no one can deny that. Point number 2, which is the more important point, is that just because they made, for someone to be considered an Ash'ari, he has to stick to that, to the teachings of that sect in its completion. He has to say, I'm an Ash'ari, this is what I believe in, all the things that they believe in with regards to Iman, with regards to Qadar, with regards to Asma' wa Sifat. They have to believe in all these things. Ibn Hajar, rahimahullah, and Nawawi, rahimahullah, they weren't Ash'ari. They never said they were Ash'ari. They never have had all these problems. They fell into a few mistakes when it came to doing ta'wil of some of the attributes of Allah. So yes, they did fall into some mistakes in those aspects, but only in one aspect in which the Ash'a'ira went astray in. Right? I'll give you an example from fiqh. If someone who follows the Hanbali madhab agreed with one opinion or took one opinion of the Shafi'i madhab, you can't say that he's a Shafi'i now just because he took one opinion that he agreed with, one of his opinions agreed with the Shafi'i madhab, but rather, if he's a Hanbali and he follows that madhab and one view agrees with the Shafi'i madhab, doesn't mean he became a follower of the Shafi'i madhab. Same thing. They didn't agree with them when it comes to Iman, when it comes to Qadar, when it comes to a lot of their other deviations. They just fell into some mistakes when it came to how they understood the attributes of Allah. And they're wrong in that. And that just shows you that they're humans, they're scholars, and the scholars after them pointed out to those mistakes. They said, but you know what, these are in Aqeedah, and they're scholars of hadith, we're benefiting from them in hadith. Those mistakes in Aqeedah, we hope that Allah forgives them, and we benefit from what they have produced in the science of hadith. And those mistakes in Aqeedah aren't enough to make them deviant and part of that sect. They never themselves said they're Ash'a'ira. So who are we to come today and call them Ash'a'ira?
Right. I mean, there's so many points you made. I guess the first thing I want to just mention is that these things that you're mentioning about specific beliefs of the Ash'a'ira, a lot of us are unaware of this, right? So people might say, oh, why are you bringing up these complex issues? Well, first of all, we're not really the ones bringing them up, but I also want to foreshadow and say, inshallah, we will make videos where we are teaching proper Aqeedah on this channel so that you're not just left with, oh, who do we turn to? Inshallah, we will continue to explain these things if people are willing to actually put in the time and they're genuinely interested and they want to learn.
Alhamdulillah, the scholars of Al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah are plenty. Of course, if someone knows Arabic, that opens the door up a lot to a lot more resources, a lot more shuyukh and scholars that they can learn and benefit from. But it's not that, it's limited. It's not that, who they can learn from is, just one or two people. Alhamdulillah, al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah are, the majority throughout the world. And these deviant sects, if anything, they're the minority. And they're, and one of the things, on that, see, Yasir Qadhi mentioned in another, not in that podcast, but another lecture of his, he gave the example of al-Jahmiyyah. And in that example, he said, small splinter, small deviant group that came out many years back, they don't exist today anymore. They're at most 50 to 100 people, and they're gone. They're extinct. They don't. That group doesn't exist anymore. But you'll find the scholars refuting them in every single book of Aqeedah and every single book of theology. They're mentioned. I hope people don't misunderstand that. First of all, I would argue that part of the reason why they didn't spread beyond what they did, and I don't know where he got those figures from. That's not my concern. But the point is, even if they were small in number, part of the reason why they stayed small in number or didn't grow, those beliefs, those incorrect beliefs didn't spread throughout the rest of the ummah, is because other scholars of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah refuted them and they spoke out against them. They weren't quiet, say it's okay, everyone can study whatever, it's all fine and dandy, because then they would have spread. If people didn't know any better about what's right and wrong, a lot of people might have fallen for their falsehood. The other point that's important to make is that a lot of the other deviant sects were influenced by them. And a lot of the deviant sects, you'll see that they were influenced by each other as well. And just because a specific group, and even that's arguable that they don't exist today anymore, is debatable, but we're not going to get into that. But just because they don't exist anymore, assuming that's correct, doesn't mean their false beliefs don't continue to have impact even up until today. In the past, we've seen how deviant sects and their beliefs have impacted other deviant sects, and how some deviant sects split into more, more branches and more sects and things like that.
Yeah. And, now that you've sort of explained the reality of some of these other strands of theology, these other groups with a different aqeedah, and you can see how there are some irreconcilable differences, the fact that Yasir Qadhi said that he is unwilling to pigeonhole himself to a particular aqeedah, it really makes you wonder, well, what does he believe? Especially someone like himself. It's not like he's unaware of these different theologies. So it's like, well, okay, he knows about them. What does he truly think about them? He knows they can't all be right at the same time. Does he think none of them are right? Does he think the deen hasn't been preserved? That Allah didn't preserve his deen in the Quran and the Sunnah and the proper aqeedah? It really makes you wonder, So, yeah, he's sitting there and he's laughing and he's joking. And a lot of us, we don't necessarily understand what he's even talking about when he's just sitting there and saying, study any sort of aqeedah you want. But if you really understand what he's saying, it's shocking. So that's just part of what we're trying to do by pointing these things out.
See, the other point is that this type of approach that unfortunately sometimes some shuyukh have, they don't want to upset anyone. They don't want to, or they don't want to, they feel that they're not dictating on people or whatever. For whatever way that the shaitan has tricked them. Someone asks them about an issue, whether it's in fiqh or aqeedah or whatever it may be, they list all the opinions on it, even the ones that aren't remotely valid. They list all the opinions and they leave it at that. They don't realize that causes more confusion to the people, to the average Muslim. That's going to cause more confusion, or even to students of knowledge. That's going to cause more confusion. People who are trying to learn their deen, if you just list the things and leave it at that. Well, okay, what's right is the question in people's mind after you list all the opinions on something. You say, what should I do? What should I follow? What's right? You left me with no direction. You just laid out all the opinions that are there, but you didn't tell me which one is the truth. Which one is the most correct one? Which one should I follow? And when it comes to aqeedah, even if we go back to all these ones, the fact that they're all attributed to, or most of them are attributed to people, to individuals, the Ash'a'ira. Go back to a person that started that sect. Way after the Prophet ﷺ, way after the companions. The Maturidiyya, they go back to that person, specific person that started that sect. So that in of itself should really show people, I mean, if something is true, is part of Islam, is part of the deen, the Aqeedah of Al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah goes back to the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and how him and his companions understood and practiced and taught Islam and what Aqeedah, what beliefs they had. It's not like it's not anything new. None of the scholars of Al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah came up with new stuff on their own after the Prophet ﷺ and the companions. They didn't invent stuff. They didn't come up with stuff. They didn't try to think outside the box and bring new stuff that, hey, this is the correct. No, it's what's in the Quran and the Sunnah. That's the proper way of understanding things.
And it goes to show you that this isn't the first time that somebody has gone from looking at the Quran and Sunnah and then been influenced by the West, by the non-Muslims, by philosophy, by kuffar. Because this is where many of these different strands of theology come from. They come from when Muslims went and they started reading Greek philosophy and they started reading these different things and becoming influenced by it and then using their own intellect over the revelation.
SubhanAllah, I mean, two things that a lot of people, reject the truth or go astray because of, or fall into deviations because of. One is arrogance. They stop looking at things that, they stop humbling themselves to following the teaching of the Quran and the Sunnah, and they start viewing themselves as the authority on the deen. So arrogance, look at shaitan. Arrogance is what led him to disobey Allah and refused to bow down to Adam alayhi salam, and we all know that story. But the other thing is people's intellect. Sometimes smart people could be very not smart, to put it nicely. And you know what? Interestingly enough, I mean, what was mentioned in the khutbah about that we attended by one of Yasir Qadhi's peers, that he mentioned that the importance of being intelligent and intellect and smart is to follow the teachings of Islam, to get you close to Allah, to get you into Jannah. If it takes you away from Allah, that's not intelligence. So it's just interesting to contrast that. But when it comes to aql, so many of the previous deviant sects went astray because they took their own understanding, their limited understanding, no matter how smart someone is and advanced and knowledgeable and no matter how much of a genius they are, they need to realize their intellect is limited, their aql is limited, our own understanding is limited. And they need to understand that, our limited understanding is not going to encompass everything. And we shouldn't subject Allah and the teachings of Islam and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to our own intellect. That's not the test. If I can understand it, if I can make sense to it, if I like it, if it appeals to me, if it makes sense to me, then yes, it's I accept it, I follow it, it's the truth. If not, I reject it, but it's problematic. And you hear that, I mean, in that other lecture I'm referring to, he was mentioning another hadith and he mentioned how it's problematic. It's not problem. There's nothing problematic in the Quran and authentic Sunnah. If it's problematic, it's because of his own intellect, his own understanding that's not incorrect, his own limited, intellect that couldn't grasp what it is. The problem is we should accuse ourselves. The problem is in us, not in the teaching of Islam.
Especially when you expose yourself to doubts by going and learning Islam from kuffar, from people who don't believe it.
So on that point of intellect, let's contrast his approach to the approach of one of the companions, Ali radiallahu anhu. I mean, as knowledgeable as Ali was, as much of a genius and intellectual and smart he was, and that's known about him. May Allah be pleased with him and with all the companions. He said, one of his statements, this is an authentic statement of Ali radiallahu anhu. He said, if this deen was with opinions, according to our own aql and understanding and opinion, then wiping the bottom of the khuf would have made more sense. When someone's making wudu and let's say they want to wear the khuf on wudu and they want to renew their wudu, as we know from the sunnah, there's wiping over the khuf, wiping over the socks or the shoes. So Ali is saying, if this deen was according to our opinions or understanding, wiping over the bottom of the khuf would make more sense. Why he's saying? Because wiping the bottom, we walk on the bottom of the khuf, that's the part that gets dirty. Wiping over the bottom would have made more sense. But he said, but rather I saw the Prophet ﷺ wipe over the top of his khufs, to show us that this deen is not according to our opinions, not according to our intellect, not according to our own views, but rather according to our following the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ that he taught us, the teaching of Islam that he came with. It's about following, not coming up, not with trying to rationalize our deen. You know, and the thing is about our intelligence, we use our intelligence to help us follow the Quran and the Sunnah, not to come up with new rulings and to try to make sense of new ways of worshiping Allah based on what we view to be right or good.
And this was why, in closing, I wanted to contrast Aqeedah and fiqh, because, I mean, literally what Yasir Qadhi was doing was he was talking about Newtonian physics and Einsteinian physics. He is directly appealing to one's intellect, claiming that now he has reached a new level of intellect. So that's like specifically what he's doing. And I think the way he gets away with that is because when he is sort of leaving off the scholars overseas and portraying them as being naive and things of this sort, he fools people by this because they feel like Aqeedah and fiqh are the same thing. So, for example, right, you might have more knowledge of the situation of a certain country, which could help you in regards to fiqh, in regards to passing a specific fatwa, because you know about the people there, you live amongst them, you might know better than somebody who's never lived there in terms of, if I pass this fatwa, what is going to be the end result. But that doesn't have anything to do with one's aqeedah, with one's belief in Allah and the Quran and the Sunnah. So when you conflate the two, it's very problematic and it's not true.
And even when with fiqh, you know, just understanding the context to pass a fatwa for someone doesn't change the principle of that issue, the ruling of that issue in fiqh. It rather changes the application of that ruling for that specific person. Like, for example, if someone is starving, I mean, the common example people give about someone being in a situation of dire need, and when is it permissible for them to, let's say, consume something haram, let's say pork meat. They give the example that's common, that someone's in the desert, there's no food, they're starving to death, they're about to pass away, and the only thing they find is pork. Can they eat pig meat? Pork's haram. Can they eat it? And the explanation is, if they're about to pass away from hunger, not just because they're hungry. That's number one. People think, if someone's hungry, they can, because that ruling gets applied to left and right, to so many in so many incorrect ways, especially here in the West. This is a necessity, this is a need, I need this and this and that, and you have a long list of things that are luxuries, really beyond even actual needs, actual dire necessities. So if something's a darura, a necessity, that's, in that case, for example, it would be permissible for them, if they're starving to death, to eat from pork, not even their fill. Just as much as the scholar said, they would be able to eat just as much as they need to survive, stay alive, and anything beyond that would be haram for them. Now, that example, so in that context, it would be permissible for that person to eat, if they're about to starve of hunger, starve to death, to eat just as much as they need to stay alive from what's haram. But that doesn't change the basic principle in Islam that pork is haram. And that's what people are confusing. In a lot of cases, he's changing the principle, saying, because here in the West, blah, 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 we're in such a necessity, dire need, etc., etc. This is a context. And it's very easy. I mean, using that, say, the scholars don't understand overseas, is just to make it easier. If you discredit them all and everything they're going to say, you don't have to respond to anything they say that conflicts with what you say. If you say something that conflicts with what they have said, you're going to have to defend it and show your proof. I mean, this is the easiest way out. Say, I'm an intellectual, my understanding is deeper than yours, they don't know the context, I know this culture better, and automatically now, whatever I say, he doesn't have to provide any proof, any arguments to defend it. And that's the problem, is when he's end up falling into that, changing the principles, even sometimes in fiqh. But, the more danger is in aqeedah, as you had mentioned.
Yeah, I wanted to define fiqh because we already defined aqeedah earlier. Fiqh refers to knowledge of the practical minor rulings which are derived from detailed evidence and proof. So the key word there is practical. What we mean by practical is that which does not have to do with beliefs. So that is the major difference between aqeedah and fiqh, is that aqeedah, it has to do with your beliefs. Fiqh has to do with your practical actions. And so by conflating the two is something that some people have done over the years to manipulate their audience who don't know any better. They don't know the difference. So for example, right, there's somebody in particular who is Sufi. That is his aqeedah. He's a Sufi. But he would always attach himself to a particular Sunni madhab, and by that people would say, oh, see, he's not, he has proper understanding because he follows Imam Malik, for example. Right? So not understanding that, okay, even if he follows Imam Malik in regards to fiqh, even if he allegedly does that, that does not mean he has the same aqeedah of Imam Malik.
That's exactly what Hamza Yusuf does. That's exactly what he does. And he says, oh, he's Maliki, follows the madhab of Imam Malik, and even that, is debatable. How much is he actually following the fiqh madhab of Imam Malik? But what people fall for is thinking that what he's saying in terms of aqeedah, what he's teaching, from his beliefs that are deviant, that aren't in agreement with the Quran and the Sunnah, that don't fall within the aqeedah of al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah, people think that it's part of the aqeedah of Imam Malik, when in reality it's not. Imam Malik and the four imams from the four madhahib and other scholars of al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah, they all had the same aqeedah. They all agreed on so many things. Even actually some issues of fiqh, like for example wiping over the khufs, were included in some books of aqeedah, were considered, scholars of al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah considered not just the issues of aqeedah, but even some issues to show you to what point. Even the issues of wiping over the socks, over the khufs, they included that in books of aqeedah because to them, they saw that the people who were opposing that sunnah in matters of fiqh were deviant sects. So it became an issue of aqeedah in that sense, that the people of al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah affirmed that sunnah, even in fiqh. But when it came to the deviant sects, that, they rejected that or didn't, follow that sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, didn't accept it as that, yes, wiping over the khuf is part of the deen of Islam, is part of the sunnah of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. They included that even in books of aqeedah, even though it's a matter of fiqh, to show you that, again, the methodology of the scholars of the past of al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah, where even they included not only aqeedah, but even in the books of aqeedah they included an issue of fiqh because it stood for al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah. And the contrast of some people, how they just want to water down aqeedah and mush everything, lump everything together, aqeedah, fiqh, everything, and put them all together, as if they're all the same, as if it's, aqeedah is not that important, trivializing differences, and I think the one example to give that maybe helps people understand, aqeedah versus fiqh, when it comes to the issue of fasting, for example, believing that fasting the month of Ramadan is an obligation upon us as Muslims is a matter of aqeedah. How we perform the fast, what breaks our fast, what doesn't break our fast, all these things are matters of fiqh. And that's what people are confusing a lot, is, issues that are aqeedah, they think they're fiqh. The fiqh, it's the issues that are aqeedah, I think that, it's not as important, people differed in fiqh, four madhahib. The four imams all had the same aqeedah. People, maybe people should go back and study. It's not like this is new. There's even books that have been compiled upon the aqeedah of the four imams. Maybe inshallah one day in an episode we can go over that to show the people that the four imams, even when they differed in fiqh, well, first of all, they agreed on a lot of even fiqh issues. But even when they disagreed in fiqh, none of them claimed that they were, all of them were right. They all knew that one view was right, and they didn't say they were definitely right and everyone else was wrong. And they said, don't follow me, take where we took from the Quran and authentic Sunnah. But when it came to aqeedah, they all agreed upon that. None of these issues, the Asha'ira, the Mu'tazila, the Murji'ah, the Jahmiyyah, the Khawarij, none of the four Imams were part of any of these sects. They're all part of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Their basic beliefs in Aqeedah were clear. You know, in terms of affirming the attributes and believing in the qadr of Allah properly the way Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah understood it. Making dua to Allah alone. You know, all these issues that we talk about in Aqeedah, the four Imams didn't differ on these, didn't deviate in their beliefs. You know, and the small issues that they differed upon in fiqh shouldn't confuse people to think, well, there's four madhab, I can follow, you know, madhab in fiqh, why can't I follow a madhab in Aqeedah? And even that in of itself, they all said, don't follow me, and don't follow Malik, and don't follow Ahmad, don't follow... They said themselves, don't follow these scholars. Don't follow me. Follow, take from where we took.
Yeah, so Jazakallah khair, Brother Omar. This was supposed to be a short video. Inshallah, in future videos, we will start teaching things like Aqeedah, like fiqh, and try to make them shorter so that we can all learn and benefit. And one thing I just want to re-emphasize is that what we're saying throughout these videos is learn Arabic, look into what the ulama say, what the scholars of the past have said. It's just a challenge to even get people to watch more than 13 minutes of a video, so let alone learn Arabic, look into the past. But inshallah, we're going to try to do our part and try to make things more digestible and shorter and to the point. But until next time, Jazakumullahu khairan. If you did make it to the end, I think you should comment like your favorite beverage. There should be some sort of inside thing that you can participate in to let us know you made it all the way to the end. So anyways, until next time, Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.